Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump straight into a scenario, all right? I want you to picture a bustling city train station. Commuters are rushing by, announcements are blaring overhead, it's absolute chaos. And then, suddenly, right in the middle of the concourse, someone takes a hard fall. They are clearly hurt, and they really need some assistance. Now be honest with yourself for a second. What would you actually do?
Look, most of us immediately think, well, obviously I'd help. But let's really look at this situation. Instead of just one person instantly rushing over, picture the crowd. Ordinary people, all different ages, all different backgrounds, just walking by, exchanging these really subtle expressions of uncertainty. They're kind of looking at each other, waiting to see what happens next. They aren't indifferent, and they definitely aren't cruel, but they are absolutely hesitant. So why exactly do we freeze up like this when we're surrounded by other people?
The fascinating truth here is that this hesitation, it has nothing to do with a lack of caring. It's actually a deeply ingrained social reflex called the bystander effect. It's this super well-documented psychological phenomenon where, basically, the more people there are around you, the less likely any single person is to actually step up and help. But where did we even get this idea that crowds are just inherently callous and cold? To really understand it, we've got to look back at history and see how this whole myth of the uncaring crowd started in the first place.
Section 1. The Myth of Apathy. Revisiting History. So, for literally decades, psychology textbooks pointed to the tragic 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese as absolute proof that crowds just don't care. Initial newspaper reports claimed that 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack and did absolutely nothing. Zero. It was a shocking story, and it completely gripped the nation. But actually, modern reality tells a totally different story. When investigators dug into the police logs years later, they found that witnesses did call the police. The original story was massively sensationalized, and it totally misrepresented everyday people.
And this perfectly highlights how our scientific understanding is always evolving. Take this massive 2019 study, for example. Cultural anthropologist Marie Rosenkrantz-Lindegard and her team analyzed 219 real-life street disputes on security cameras across 3 different countries. And guess what? Bystanders intervened in almost every single case. She literally called it a highly radical discovery. The cold hard evidence actually shows that we humans are naturally inclined to step in and help each other.
Section 2. Why we freeze. Cognitive hurdles.
Okay, so this brings up a really interesting contradiction. If we are naturally hardwired to help, why on earth do we still get that sudden paralysis in a busy public square? Well, when you see someone in distress, your brain basically slams into 3 major cognitive hurdles. First up, pluralistic ignorance. Emergencies are confusing, right? So you look around to see how everyone else is reacting. But since everyone is trying to play it cool, you assume it must not be a real emergency. It's just a giant loop of people looking at other people. Second is the diffusion of responsibility. Subconsciously, you're thinking, hey, there are 50 people here, someone else has probably got this. The pressure to act gets totally watered down. And finally, there's the fear of social judgment. You're worried you'll look foolish or overreact if you jump in and wasn't actually needed. But here's where it gets wild. This isn't just some psychological choice you're making, it is literally neurological. Functional MRI studies have shown that when you witness an emergency with other people around, your brain's medial prefrontal cortex, which is the key region that preps you to help, actually powers down. Just being in a crowd literally dampens the part of your brain that screams at you to take action. Crazy, right?
So what's happening is basically a massive biological tug-of-war in your head. On one side, you have personal distress. That's your immediate fight-freeze-flight response, which usually tells you to avoid the situation to protect yourself. On the other side, you've got sympathy. Now, sympathy is what drives you to help, but it boots up much, much slower. So that initial freeze you see in the train station, that's just a sudden spike of personal distress overpowering your sympathy for a split second.
Section 3. Economics of Helping. Cost-benefit analysis.
And beyond the pure biology of it all, our brains are basically high-speed calculators. Before you even take a single step forward, you are subconsciously running the numbers on what stepping out of that crowd is going to cost you. In a fraction of a second, you do a full cost-benefit analysis. You're weighing things like the time it'll take, the physical danger, or the social embarrassment of getting it wrong against the rewards. And those rewards could be external, like praise, or completely internal, like dodging a heavy guilt trip or just acting on your genuine concern for the victim. If your brain decides the costs are too high, yep, you guessed it, you stay frozen.
But despite all those complex mental gymnastics, the drive to help is still completely hardwired into our DNA. Evolutionary psychology gives us a few solid reasons for this. First, There's kin selection, basically helping out to make sure our shared genetics survive. Then there's reciprocal altruism, which is the totally pragmatic idea that, hey, if I help you today, you or someone else will help me down the road. And finally, sometimes it is just pure empathy altruism. That is a completely selfless, totally genuine concern for another human being, regardless of what it costs you.
Section 4. How to break the spell. Overcoming the effect.
Okay, so here is the absolute most important takeaway. Since we now know that freezing in a crowd is mostly just a biological reflex and a cognitive glitch, and not because we're all secretly terrible people, how do we override it? How do we break the spell? Well, if you are ever the one in need, say you're the person who took that hard fall in the station, you can actually shatter that diffusion of responsibility with 3 very specific steps. Step 1, make direct eye contact with one single individual in the crowd. Step 2, point directly at them. And step 3, give a clear command. Do not just yell a generic help. You have to say, hey, you in the red shirt, call 911. By making it personal, you make it literally impossible for that person's brain to pass the buck to the rest of the crowd.
Now, what if you're standing in the crowd? You can be the one to break the spell for everybody else. Just loudly asking, hey, is everything okay? Completely shatters that pluralistic ignorance we talked about. It instantly tells everyone else, yes, this is an emergency, and it gives the crowd permission to act. You can also use a safe distraction to break the tension, and always, always trust your gut if something feels off. And remember, the second you step up and model that helping behavior, you completely flip the dynamic. The rest of the crowd is suddenly way more likely to follow your lead.
So we've seen today that a passive crowd isn't a heartless crowd. They are just ordinary people caught in a really powerful psychological and biological loop. Now that you understand the hidden forces at play, the diffusion of responsibility, the dampening of your prefrontal cortex, that intense tug-of-war between distress and sympathy, I want to leave you with one final thought. The next time someone is in trouble and you feel that whole crowd start to freeze, will you be the one to step forward and break the spell?